If it was to get the support that would be needed for probable military operations, the government in 2002-3 had to convince the public and Parliament of an imminent threat from Iraq's WMD that was significant enough for British troops to die for. A fundamental requirement for this, of course, was that Iraq had to have significant quantities of chemical or biological weapons to pose such a threat. Intelligence did not allow such an assessment until at least the end of August 2002, when up popped a number of intelligence reports that some thought seemed to fit the bill. These arrived in the middle of the assessment process of a JIC paper, which was due for approval on the 4th of September. As it considered the draft assessment, the JIC was told of this important new intelligence that had only recently arrived, and the assessment staff was told to include some of this before the report was issued. The report was finally issued a few days later on the 9th of September. In fact, the new intelligence, as far as I read the situation, was so weak that the assessment staff struggled to use it. In the end, they incorporated just one sentence and buried it deep in the text. And it was this: intelligence also indicates that biological and chemical munitions could be with military units and ready for firing within 20 to 45 minutes. We can discuss why this is such a weak statement later if you wish. But if it had been true, it would not only have shown that Iraq had both chemical and biological munitions, but also that it had them in sufficient quantities for the deployment implied by that statement. We had no other credible evidence that this was the case. But the statement in the JIC assessment was not strong enough for the Prime Minister's dossier, which was being hurriedly drafted at the time. The drafters now tried to harden it up for the dossier, but the analysts said no, and there was deadlock. But suddenly, obviously too late for the JIC paper on the 9th of September, up popped something else. Number 10 was told about it on the 12th of September, although on the basis of his evidence to Chilcot, Tony Blair doesn't seem to recall this particular piece of intelligence. Conveniently, the intelligence says, and we now know it says this much, that production of agent or weapons, or both, had indeed taken place. Unfortunately, it was from a new source said to be on trial, and as far as I can gather, there was never any collateral around for it, except that was given by each of these two reports, the 45-minute report and this report, which were both from shaky sources. And that was the only relatively poor collateral that seemed to me to exist. I've called this second report, Report X, because if you keep stringing along the words, this sensitive intelligence report that came up in the beginning of September, I've called it Report X, and I think I called it Report X for X the unknown, because only a very few people knew what was in that report, and I don't think many more people know what was in it to this day. It was not shown to the intelligence analysts at the time. It was said to be too sensitive, but it was enough to break the deadlock. And this is what happened, really. The analysts were overruled. The JIC could sign off on the dossier and did not argue, as far as anyone has admitted, with the Prime Minister's assertion that it left no doubt that Iraq had WMD. Despite not being mentioned in the dossier, or I think, as far as I know, in any JIC assessment, in the true tradition of the mysterious world of intelligence, its invisible presence, the invisible presence of Report X, was the single most important element in the government's case for war. We know a remarkable amount about the 45-minute intelligence report, but clearly it was not strong enough to stand alone. It needed to be stood up by Report X. But 7 years and 4 inquiries on, we still know very little about what was actually in Report X. When the experts finally saw it, probably shortly after the war, I understand they dismissed it quite quickly. The Foreign Affairs Committee didn't know about this report at all when they conducted their inquiry. And it was kept out of the Hutton inquiry until I mentioned it in my evidence, which was well into the inquiry. And after quite a lot of government witnesses had given evidence where it really would have been very much more convenient to talk about it. Hutton, I believe, was never shown the actual report. In fact, the report had been withdrawn even before Hutton started seeing witnesses. And I think, certainly I didn't know about it, and I don't think he knew about it until 6 months after he reported. Reading between the lines of its report, it appears to me that attempts were made to keep Report X away from the Intelligence and Security Committee. But they did eventually get to see it and knew it had been withdrawn. But the ISC didn't mention either its withdrawal or any uncertainty about its sourcing in its report. The Butler Review, of course, did see Report X. The ISC said this of Report X: "We were told that there was further intelligence of a nature so sensitive that it was only released on a very restricted basis. We have seen that intelligence and understand the basis on which CDI and the JIC took the view they did." Now that sounded to me at the time like an endorsement of Report X, and indeed some have suggested it was, both in the House and in evidence to inquiries. But when I discussed it with a member of the ISC, not, I hasten to add, our chairman, a few months later, I was told that the statement was intended to be obviously Delphic in nature, and whilst the committee did not endorse the view, it could understand how others might. The Butler report describes Report X as being from a new source on trial and about Iraqi production of chemical and biological agents, which had been accelerated by the Iraqi regime, including through the building of further facilities throughout Iraq. Butler acknowledges that Report X provided significant assurance to those drafting the dossier that agent was actively being produced, but does not go so far as to explain, very clearly at least, the context of it breaking the deadlock associated with the approval of the dossier by the DIS as a body. The withdrawal of Report X in July 2003 is described as being about its sourcing, or the lack of reliability of its sourcing. However, nothing is said, as far as I can see, about the quality of the intelligence contained in the report. How much sense did it make? How specific was it? Did it identify the agents involved? Did the source say anything about how they were produced, or how much was produced, or where they were produced and stored? Was there significant collateral for what it said? Was collateral sought and found between September 2002, when it appeared, and March 2003, when the war began? We don't know the answers to those questions. Of the reporting up to the JIC paper of the 9th of September, Butler commented that we were struck by the relative thinness of the intelligence base, supporting the greater firmness of the JIC's judgment on Iraqi production and possession of chemical and biological weapons. Butler expressed no view on whether it believed Report X added significant depth to that intelligence base. I suspect it did not. And I think it's about time that Parliament and the public were told a little more about that, and about the retrospective analysis that surely must have been done on that report, given its importance. Because I believe that would tell us something about the quality of the decision made by those who obviously decided it was convincing. The whole subject of Report X, to my mind, raises important issues about how our intelligence machine worked at that time. And Butler did identify quite a lot of the problems, but there were a few that it did not identify. The implementation of the Butler recommendations has left a few important ones out, and I don't think the potential major flaws in the system have been properly resolved. In the book, I identify what I believe these flaws are, and I discuss them and provide suggestions for their resolution in some little detail. So perhaps now it's time for me to give you some bottom lines on the consequences of the Iraq War that may prove to have a significance greater than the war itself. It's my view that the Iraq War has set back the wider cause of nuclear, biological, and chemical arms control and non-proliferation. It and other aspects of the war on terror may arguably have pushed some elements of the threat from international terrorism to the right, but I respect the judgments of the former head of MI5, Baroness Manningham-Buller, as she gave them to the Iraq inquiry a few weeks ago. In particular, the war appears to have unleashed something in UK that might otherwise have been kept in check, and as last week's Russie report apparently suggests, there may be unforeseen consequences in train yet. And finally, I think British intelligence has yet to recover from the credibility it lost over Iraq. If our foreign and defence policy outlook, as a result of the review in progress at the moment, is not to change, then I think this is of great importance. And I suggest that the intelligence machine should be subjected to a thorough, independent review, and that perhaps a major top-end organisational change should be considered.